Okay, everybody, it's 10 o'clock.
All righty.
We'll get started on Daniel 3, but let's think a little bit about Daniel 2. What happened last week? Does anyone remember?
Daniel interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream.
Right, and the statue. Remember, it was had a head of gold and the chest and arms of silver, and the belly and thighs were bronze, and the legs were iron, and the feet were part clay and part iron. And and David was explain and Daniel was explaining to the king that the statue represented four successive kingdoms, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar as the gold and moving down to the silver, which gets a little bit less precious, to bronze, to iron, and then part iron and clay, and which is a divided kingdom, he said. And then a big stone comes, and what did they say? But not a rock was cut out, but not by human hands, struck the statue, tore it to pieces, and it all blew away like shafts of wheat on the threshing floor. And he interprets that dream about each being a successive kingdom getting weaker and weaker, and finally just being destroyed. So when we start chapter 3, and then at the very end of this, after Daniel has interpreted the dream, and Nebuchadnezzar, is all excited about that, then he Daniel gets a position, or asks for a position within the court with the king, and stay with the king. But then he asked the king to appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as administrators over Babylon. And so that's where we enter, chapter 3. And the story continues there. And so this chapter is called The Image of Gold and the Blazing Furnace. And so I was wondering if I was going to kind of divide the chapter in two, and it's kind of a long reading, but I think since this is a story, we almost need to kind of do it that way. So if someone could read, maybe Sarah, since you're usually the first one, read 1 through 18, and then we'll have maybe Kathy read the rest of it. But we'll go read 1 through 18 and see if we have any comments on that before we proceed.
Okay. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits, whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and to come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces assembled for the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the years of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These shall pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in, so that they brought those men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now, if you are ready when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and the entire musical ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of the blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up."
Wow. Okay, so I was kind of showing you, give you an idea of the kind of the size of the and shape of the golden statue that was supposed to be done. It was like supposed to be like 9 foot by 90 foot. And to give you an idea, the Washington Monument is 555 feet. Okay, so wasn't this, I always imagined and thinking about it, this huge thing, but it was only about less than a fifth the size of the Washington Monument. And this just shows you a little picture of about a 6-foot person, by the particular statue. And it doesn't give you any details, about whether it had an image of anyone on the top of it, but being that small, it almost was like I kept thinking of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where
Yeah.
it's just this big monolith kind of a thing.
It's about 4 or 5 story building.
Yeah, 4 or 5 story building, Bud says. And notice that, remember the statue before, that you would think, why after hearing about this, dreaming about this statue of gold and bronze and whatever, right after that, or at least in the storyline, he starts building a statue, but it's all gold. So it's just representing the head of the other statue that he dreamed about. So, what would possess him, to build this statue?
Pure arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
He thought he was the be all and end all of rulers, and he was just arrogant.
Yeah. Well, and he just had Daniel tell him that you're the gold head, and that everything below you is going to be lesser, basically. So he just took it. He took a little bit of that dream, and was running with it and building this big statue. So, and this particular reading this, it just says, why do they keep repeating these things over and over again? Did you notice, that it's just like all of these musical instruments and all of the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, keeps repeating that. And they were just letting you know that I think the author kind of compares it with all of the people that the Israelites or the Jewish people would get together to dedicate a temple, or to dedicate the new wall built in Jerusalem, those kinds of things. So they were bringing all of the government officials together to witness this big gold monolith or statue, and telling everyone that. And can you imagine all those instruments when these instruments play? What it must sound like? The author was saying that it was like every like wind instruments and percussion instruments and everything. And what did they had this little band running around, playing and expecting everyone to.
Because it sounded like an orchestra,
Yeah,
just in all the orchestra.
Yeah,
So
Yeah,
getting out there with all their music stands and their folding chairs and their black tie.
yeah,
So-
and also it got tiring. The statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up
right. And they say that
9 times.
9 times in this chapter, it always says that he set up, really giving him, complete authority and ownership and responsibility for setting this up, that he created this. Like God created the earth, he created this monolith, and everyone's bowing down to this particular statue. But they also, I think that it was that Sal said that same word used for the dedication of this statue is the same word they used for dedication of an altar or the temple, when they dedicated that in Israel. So the king requested everyone immediately complied. Like everyone came together when he called everyone together to dedicate this statue. So then we have the accusation that comes when it says, and in the NIV version, it says, at this time, some astrologers, they used astrologers instead of the Chaldeans, came forward announcing to denounce the Jews. They told the king, okay, you've asked everyone to come together and to bow down whenever the music plays to this golden statue, and the Jewish people aren't doing it. But in particular, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego aren't doing it. And so you've got these Chaldeans who are, one, probably professionally jealous because what happened in the last chapter with Daniel being able to interpret the dream and then being given a high position, and so they've been kind of, they've had all these foreigners come in and they're taking over, that they're really kind of lording above them. And they didn't like that. And so that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or maybe really the author states it probably is kind of accusing all of the Jewish people, but particularly those 3 for not bowing down. And it was kind of telling to me when he got angry, of course, and called them in front of him and says, and asked, but he actually asked them, is that true? Did anyone kind of notice that, is this really the truth? You didn't do this? Because
It's like, how could you betray me because
well, that, and plus, how much do you think Nebuchadnezzar trusts these Chaldeans or these astrologers? Chaldeans and or the astrologers, because he's always questioning them. They might be the first people they go to, but they really can't ever solve his problem. So then he goes to Daniel, and so he's really saying, is this true? And if it is, he doesn't even give them time to answer whether it's true or not. He says, when that music plays, you better fall down, that'll tell it, and otherwise you're going to be thrown into a fire.
I think Nebuchadnezzar has a very short memory, because Daniel not only interpreted the dream, he told him what the dream was. And after he did that, he said, surely your God is the God of gods. But he gets amnesia and throws the 3 into the fire.
Right. But he immediately gets big-headed, and by building this statue and thinking he can control everyone. That he's the one, he has sovereignty over everyone, and not this God that Daniel, that he kind of praised after. Right. So you're right. I think he does have a short-term memory or a selective memory.
Well, and if you're really self-absorbed, those conversations don't really get internalized, you know, you just,
Right.
you get right back to the self-absorption and, you know, it's all about me. So that gold is too attractive to Nebuchadnezzar, seems like.
Yeah. And then, you know, I think that then we have the response, you know, or one of the big questions that that the author mentions here is that Nebuchadnezzar is actually calling out God. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? You know, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reply to him. And I think that here we see faithfulness at its heart, you know, that they say, you know, if our God can, our God can save us if our God chooses to save us, but even if he doesn't choose to save us, then we still will not worship your God. You know, so they're basically saying we're willing to die, you know, for our belief and faith in our God. And then we come to the next part of the chapter where we find out what happens as a result of that. So, any thoughts about their response to the king? What would we be that strong?
Yeah,
Well,
that's,
I also think if this is almost a departing a new theology in a way, the beginnings of this whole idea, you know, before, and mostly I think in the Jewish tradition, God is the God of the nation of Israel, and things are usually thought of as the nation. But this is the beginning, of course, the beginning of Daniel. It seems to me like it's the beginning of thinking about God being involved in your personal life.
Mhm.
And then when they are saying, certainly God's involved enough to do what he wants and he can save us, we're going to, you know, like you said, we're going to be faithful either way. I just feel like that's almost a kind of departing from some of the other Old Testament literature. You know, it's and it says so much to, I think, the way we live our lives today, in the sense that you know, we've almost been taught that in Christianity, anything you ask Jesus or God in Jesus' name, you'll get. And this is telling us, though, this is saying very strongly, you know, we worship, but it's not quid pro quo. You know, we do these things no matter what God decides to do. And I don't know, that kind of hit me pretty heavy, you know.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought of it that way, Harold. But you know, that's a good way to think of it. Um, it's a real proclamation of their faith, that faith is not conditional upon God's response, whatever that may be. We're to worship God alone and no other God, regardless of how God will or won't act.
and that they declare that to Nebuchadnezzar,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the whole story of Job. You know, no matter what happened, no matter what bad things came, he didn't falter in his faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, let's continue the story with 19 through 30.
Okie doke. Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not three men that we bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied, "But I see four men unbound walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the fourth has the appearance of a god." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their tunics were not harmed, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn from limb to limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
They were already administrators. I wonder what he made them. They got their promotion. Okay. So they heated up the furnace 7 times hotter than usual. And we hear that 7 again, the symbol for extreme or completeness is what the author says. And he says that it must have been, he's trying to visualize what this furnace must have looked like. And if they were thrown in, he thought, well, there must be a hole at the top, with the flames coming out, that they fell into the furnace. And then it killed the people who were actually trying to put them in the furnace because of the heat. And then yet there must, Sal is saying that there must have been a door or something at the bottom of the furnace because Nebuchadnezzar actually could look in and see the people walking around. And
he was firing bricks at a lot of the lake.
Yeah. Where he saw not 3 people walking around, but 4 people walking around. And in the NIV version, it says, I think that, what did it say here? Some looked like,
And the fourth has the appearance of a god.
yeah, right. And in here it says the fourth looks like a son of the gods. In NIV. So he sees 4 people. 4th person looks like a son of the gods, or a divine being, is how Sal explains it. And he was also, the author was also talking a lot about how God is often represented by fire. Okay, the burning bush, the pillar of fire in Egypt. So the Old Testament fire is associated with the presence of God. So, it's really strange that his response is he's really a strange character where Nebuchadnezzar, he sees this miracle and then all of a sudden he says, oh, this God is the greatest God, and now he's going to make this decree that anyone who doesn't believe in this God is going to get torn limb from limb. So it's just like he still has to have this power in some way,
Mhm.
of being in charge of people now worshiping this particular deity. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God.
It still isn't, both after the dream interpretation and now, Nebuchadnezzar's not saying anything about himself in relation to God.
Mhm.
The last time it was like, hey, yeah, the first time after the dream, hey, yeah, your God looks like he's pretty cool, And this time he's saying, no, I'm going to defend you, but it's not doing anything he's not saying anything about how his own faith has changed or his,
Uh-huh. Right. It's not affecting him. He still is wanting to have the power.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about this story overall? We
Well,
had
it's not a religious thought, but it's just an observation how powerful fire is, and how that metaphor has become to represent God. The very first person who was able to create fire was something special, and then there were people who carried a hot coal around to keep a fire going, and then I just bring that all the way forward, and I'm thinking of what in this world, or even what in this universe, can be made without fire. It's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. And these Jews came out and they didn't even smell of smoke, So they didn't just survive, they also experienced God
Mhm.
in this fire.
Mhm.
Another book that we looked at when we were looking at the study of Daniel, by Sibley Towner. And on chapter 3, he states that this story encourages us to be about our tasks of faithfulness and our great refusals, so that we do as little as possible to participate. Let me get rid of this. Whoop, am I still there?
Yep, we see you.
Okay. I can't see anybody. There we are. There we are. So that we do as little as possible to participate in the destructive tendency of human against human, and so that we do as much as we can to demonstrate that those who are clear about their own identity as disciples can stand up against the glowering powers which require our allegiance to false and demonic claims. In the end, God's way will be vindicated. That is the faith of this chapter. Indeed, the faith of the book of Daniel for the ultimate vindication and enthronement of the saints over the whole world is prefigured in the miraculous deliverance of the 3 children from the furnace, in the king's recognition of their God, and in his promotion of them over the affairs of Babylon. And though we may go to the wall before the firing squad or into the heart of a firestorm, we can make such events meaningful, not absurd, by facing them squarely and denying on principle the right of the powers of this world to deflect us from the ways of justice and peace.
There was a show that Gail and I just happened to come upon a couple nights ago, and it was called This Month in Christian History. And it took 2 or 3 people, most of, I had not heard of most of them, but the things that they did, and well, almost every one of them ended up being martyred. And it was so weird. That exact show, these exact people, the week we're studying this and Daniel, it was just so interesting. But I'll tell you, that show just gave you goosebumps.
This
it's
month
like-
in Christian history.
yes, yes. And apparently it's a regular show on one of the religious channels. I don't even know what channel we were on, and but it was amazing. We just don't hear about all the people that and the amazing things they've done and the bravery and the sacrifice. And like, well, I'd heard Martin Luther King was one of the people, but the others I had never really heard of by name and stuff, and it was just amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the serendipity of being exactly this week, I
Yeah.
guess.
It's so wonderful to find shows like that or stories like that when we're so inundated all of the time with so much bad stuff that the good stuff just doesn't attract the news, and so it's nice to be able to find stories that are real encouraging and build you up like that.
Well, I think there already are some stories coming out of Ukraine.
Right.
And I think that will be continuing, just not only in terms of events within the country, but the response to the refugees, who've had to flee from Ukraine. And so, yeah, lots of times the folks that go through those experiences don't necessarily want the public acclaim and attention.
Mhm. Right.
But
Tom and I have been watching a documentary series, and it's on demand on National Geographic Channel on 9/11, One Day in America. And it's the same thing there. There were people, the first responders and some that survived. And it was like, I was just doing my job.
mhm.
We
Yeah.
went to the D-Day Memorial place over
Bedford.
And at the end of that tour, I just became very emotional, just thinking about all the little individual sacrifices that were made, and were it not for that, I wouldn't have had the life I had.
Right.
There was a little story that in a overview of Daniel that one minister shared, where he said that, and I'll just read that. It says, "The forgotten dream in chapter 2 illustrates the principle that when faced with impossible situations, God can step in and provide the answers to the most perplexing difficulties. He actually stands by his people during fiery trials, even when they are unaware of his presence," in chapter 3. This reminds me of what some of my church members experienced nearly 40 years ago. There were 4 of them in a yacht and they hit stormy seas, and it was so bad they had to get into a life raft. They floated for days until eventually rescued by a merchant ship that had been diverted to rescue them. The captain, in welcoming them aboard, asked them, "Where's the 5th person?" He had counted 5 in the raft and was surprised when only 4 clambered aboard. So it reminded me a little bit, of that story of the 4th person in the fiery furnace,
Mhm.
And, sometimes you have to go through fire in order to change.
Mhm.
But if we're all happy and healthy and warm and snuggly and have all the food that we need, what's our reason, to change? That it's usually the bad or the hard things in life that cause us to move up a step on the ladder, I think, sometimes.
Mhm.
Okay. I think we'll try to get into chapter 4 now. Now, one of the things was this particular chapter is called Nebuchadnezzar's Dream of a Tree, or another place calls it the humbling of Nebuchadnezzar. And the first 3 verses of that, if you remember, at the end of chapter 3, it says, "Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon." Now, in some cases, the first 3 verses of chapter 4 are a part of chapter 3, and where it goes, where it would continue. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders of the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. And remember last week, I think, Kathy, you had set up there was a doxology. So this was called the
Daniel's saying, yeah.
It's kind of a doxology, or a worship, a praise, written King Nebuchadnezzar. So some places it appears in chapter 3, some places it appears in chapter 4.
So this is Nebuchadnezzar speaking now.
King Nebuchadnezzar to the nations.
All right, so I take back what I was saying earlier about how Nebuchadnezzar hadn't changed.
Right.
Obviously had not read ahead.
Right. Or he's already experienced all that, and now he's telling about it. And this chapter moves first person and third person, as we go through it. But if would someone like to read 4 through 18?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living at ease in my home and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that frightened me. My fantasies in bed and the visions of my head terrified me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, in order that they might tell me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the diviners came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not tell me its interpretation. At last Daniel came in before me. He endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, and I told him the dream. O Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, and that no mystery is too difficult for you. Hear the dream that I saw. Tell me its interpretation. Upon my bed, this is what I saw. There was a tree at the center of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew great and strong. Its top reached to the heaven, and it was visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it provided food for all. The animals of the field found shade under it. The birds of the air nested in its branches, and from it all living beings were fed. I continued looking in the visions of my head as I lay in the bed, and there was a holy watcher coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, "Cut down the tree and chop off its branches, strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from beneath it and the birds from its branches, but leave its stump and roots in the ground with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field and the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let the mind of an animal be given to him, and let 7 times pass over him. The sentence is rendered by decree of the watchers. The decision is given by order of the holy ones, in order that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of mortals. He gives it to whom he will, and sets it over the lowliest of human beings." Did you want one more verse?
Yes.
This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw. Now you, Belshazzar, declare the interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are unable to tell me the interpretation. You are able, however, for you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods.
The holy gods.
With a little g.
So this is presented as a letter, like Nebuchadnezzar's writing this letter to the nations and peoples of every language who live on all the earth, okay, and sharing this particular story, with them. And we have in this stream, we have the good news. So we have the optimistic side, which shows this beautiful tree grows large and strong and touches the sky and is visible to the ends of the earth, and it has abundant fruit and food for all, and and animals find shelter under it, and birds live in its branches. And we've heard the tree story in other parts of the Old Testament, too, where where Israel is looked at as a tree. And then it also had mentioned that with the mind of an animal, 7 times will pass by. So they say that's really 7 times is like 7 years. This person will be have the mind of an animal, kind of toward the end. So the dream frightens him, of course, and he calls in his buddy Daniel to explain. But I think also it mentions that he called in the other people first, right? I had a dream. I commanded all the wise men of Babylon to be brought before me to interpret it, and they could not interpret it for me. Why in the world would he call in those people again when he knows
Amnesia. He's got amnesia again.
Right. I think even more reason.
How would you have it?
Or maybe it's even the king has a protocol where he's got to call in, these people. But then in the end, he knows to get what he needs to get Daniel in there. So we have the optimistic part of the dream and the pessimistic part of the dream, where this huge tree, and the author kind of compares it with the Tower of Babel, how it's being this tree is reaching up to the sky and all the world can see it and whatever. And then, God is striking it down. Okay. The tree, the watcher, it says, or in NIV, it calls it a messenger. The watcher comes down from heaven and called out in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches and strip it of its leaves, and then we have this tree becoming kind of moving between becoming a human and then becoming an animal, the mind of an animal, let his mind be changed from that of a man, which the tree is now a man, and let it become an animal. Shapeshifters, Bud said. We've been listening to Lord of the Rings in the car. So one moment it's a tree, one moment it's a fettered animal. It says, no doubt the purpose of the story, in order that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of mortals. He gives it to whom he will and sets over the lowest of human beings. So both the dream we heard in Daniel 2 and 4, it seems like that the powerful will be humbled and that the Most High will set the lowest of mortals over the kingdom of mortals. So Nebuchadnezzar turns to Daniel to interpret it. And would someone like to read the rest of the chapter?
I got it. Then Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar, was severely distressed for a while. His thoughts terrified him. The king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or the interpretation terrify you. Belteshazzar answered, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree that you saw, which grew great and strong, so that its top reached to heaven and was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose foliage was beautiful and its fruit abundant, and which provided food for all, under which animals of the field lived, and whose branches the birds of the air had nests. It is you, O king. You have grown great and strong. Your greatness has increased and reaches to heaven, and your sovereignty to the ends of the earth. And whereas the king saw a holy watcher coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the ground with a band of iron and bronze in the grass of the field, and let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot with the animals of the field until 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and it is a decree of the Most High that has come upon my lord the king. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the wild animals. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and you shall be bathed with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals, and gives it to whom he will. As it was commanded to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be reestablished for you from the time you learn that heaven is sovereign. Therefore, O king, may my counsel be acceptable to you. Atone for your sins with righteousness, and your iniquities with mercy to the oppressed, that your prosperity may be prolonged. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king said, is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power and for my glorious majesty? While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, the kingdom has departed from you. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the animals of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdoms of mortals, and gives it to whom he will. Immediately the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society, ate grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with the dew of heaven, until his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails became like bird's claws. When that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. I blessed the Most High and praised the Honored One who lives forever. For his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. For there is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, what are you doing? At that time my reason returned to me, and my majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my lords sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol the honor of the King of heaven, for all his works are truth and his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk with pride.
Whoa.
I was looking in this Harper's Dictionary, and it says it was thought by some scholars that that Daniel 4, which records the madness of Nebuchadnezzar, may have incorporated accounts pertaining to a less known Babylonian monarch named Nabonidus. What was it? Nabonidus, whatever. Anyway, if you look into his history, he took a sabbatical for about 10 years, left his son in charge, and went and hung out in the desert where he was apparently encouraged by a Jewish scholar to worship the one God. And the insanity thing, they thought that was sort of a Babylonian propaganda program by the priests, who were pissed that he was worshiping the one God instead of the Babylonian gods. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
Well, it's at 10:50, so I'm sorry we don't have too much time to discuss this. Maybe we can continue this discussion just at the beginning of next week before we move on to chapter 5. But Daniel from Towner, the other commentator, he says Daniel 4 offers as the basis of hope and even as an interim ethic these convictions. The Lord is the overlord of kings. God is the overlord of kings. He will bring those who wager their sovereignty against his to their knees, and he can do this in such a way that the good sovereigns will emerge, that it's not power that is bad. You will have it too. Glory is not bad either. There is a place for it among people, even among the lowest people. Think of that, how that sounded to people who reeled before the royal might and had no glory of their own. But power and glory have their legitimate place only within the framework of righteousness and justice, which God has established and of which he is the head and the chief cornerstone.
Hmm.
There are a
So,
couple of concepts here that we've read about in other places that are first stated, if you think about it too, the concept of watchers, heavenly
uh-huh,
watchers. That's here for the first time. The
Right.
only concept that's put here that we've read about in other places is the idea that when in heaven, all the spiritual beings are infatuated by the desire for physical experience. Some came to earth as animals, some came as trees, some came as stones, all to experience what it was like to be physical.
mhm,
And of course, that here also, he's talking about the mind of the tree becomes the mind of an animal, the mind of a, so it's this spiritual thing becoming
Yeah.
all these different physical entities.
right.
Hmm.
Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you on Easter Sunday.